It's the middle of summer and you finally finished up enough work or chores that you can head to the river and do some fishing. But when you pull up, you realize that you haven't fished since before spring runoff, and the only flies in your boxes are tiny dry flies and nymphs. That may not seem like a big problem, but it is, because the flies that are hatching during summer are completely different from what was coming off in the spring, and these summer fish are going to be keyed in on some big old bugs that look like they belong in Jurassic Park. Your great day of summer fishing starts to look a bit dim. Well, this week on Untangled, we're going to brighten that picture up by sharing a list of must-have summer fly patterns. These flies will help you put fish in the net all summer long. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. Putting a list together like this is a bit of a gamble, because I'm either going to leave a fly off the list, and that is going to cause some people so much shock that they're going to leave a comment or write an email in asking me, how could you leave that fly off of that list? Do you even fly fish? And there's going to be a little bit of consternation. Or I'm going to mention a fly that's maybe a little under the radar, and some folks are going to worry that me talking about it on the YouTube is going to force that fly to lose a bit of its efficacy. So it's kind of a no-win situation for me, but I soldier on anyways, because I think these lists are helpful, effective, and they're fun to do. We all like a list, right? Remember BuzzFeed from whenever BuzzFeed was a thing? We love lists. So, I hope these are helpful lists just to set a good baseline of summer flies or spring flies or whatever season of the year that we're in when we're talking about it. But before we get to the list, I just want to make sure that y'all are aware of what we've got coming up in the Q&A section of the show this week. We're going to be talking about a situation that if you are new to fly fishing, you're going to run into it this year, or if you've already been fishing for a year or two, you've experienced this, and that is the fact that rivers change a ton during the year. You've got spring runoff when they're high and muddy and almost impossible to fish, and then you've got the really low flows of summer. And within all those changes, your favorite river can wear a ton of different faces. It can look very different. Your favorite spot that you fished in spring might not even be there in the summer. So how do you navigate that? How do you still catch fish as the water changes so drastically? We're going to discuss all of that in the Q&A section of the show this week, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But let's dive into this list. And just for a little bit of context for those who may not know, and then as a refresher for the rest of us, you got to remember that all the aquatic insects that the fish eat are going to hatch at different times of the year. Now, this means I don't get my Christmas Day golden stonefly hatch. I don't get to fish that. I would love to have that hatch. Maybe down in Argentina, maybe it does happen on Christmas Day. I'd have to do the math. I just barely thought of that. But here in the States, here in the West, middle of December, I'm not getting golden stoneflies. And then, in the middle of summer, there'll still be midges hatching, but we're focusing on other bugs that are coming off, because your winter months are dominated by your midges, your scuds, and your worms. Those are your dominant food sources. Spring, you've got the first of the mayflies that come out and some stoneflies. Summer rolls around. We've got stoneflies, caddisflies, mayflies, and midges all hatching together. It's mayhem, to be completely honest. Fall kicks in. We're back to mostly mayflies and midges, and then we're back into winter. So that's why there's so many fly patterns out there, why us anglers carry so many flies. We've got to be prepped for the seasons as they're just constantly changing. And if all that information is new, or you'd like to be able to refer back to that at some point, we actually have a free resource to help with this. We put together a year-round hatch chart that goes into a lot more depth about when and where all these different bugs hatch. I'll link that in the show notes, or there'll be a link on the screen for those who want to check it out if you're watching the video podcast. And with that, let's do the list. I've included the sizes of the flies that I recommend, what they imitate, and why I picked that fly in particular. So let's start it off with number one. And one more thing to preface. These are not in order. So this is not the number one fly that I would use all the time. It's just the order that they came out of my head onto my show notes for the day. So fly number one, your Chubby Chernobyl. I like this in a size 10 and 12. Chubbies are going to imitate everything from grasshoppers to stoneflies, so they're a very versatile bug. They float very high. They float forever because they're made out of foam, so you don't have to apply nearly as much floatant to keep them up. And because they're made of foam, they can support heavy droppers. So if you want to fish a big stonefly nymph underneath it as some sort of dry dropper rig, or you just want to fish two nymphs off of it, or one really effective tactic can be drifting a big streamer like a woolly bugger underneath it. Just dead drift that streamer. It'll look like a crawdad or some kind of stunned fish or even a big leech that's just kind of drifting. You can float that underneath underneath the Chubby Chernobyl. And then, of course, you've got the added benefit of that chubby acting as an indicator, but it's also an indicator that the fish can come up and eat. And then the topwater eats, when they are going on the hoppers, are a lot of fun. They tend to kind of blow them up. They get really aggressive with them. Like me at a wing joint, if I'm not gonna leave elbow room for anybody else. If there's a buffet table at that wing joint, you better get out of my way. Okay, that's how the fish are with these chubbies sometimes. But yeah, sizes 10 to 12. That's the sizes I like. I know some folks will go up a size to like an 8. That's just a little too big for me. I don't really ever need them that big, and they're a pain to cast when they get that big. That 10 to 12 is kind of the sweet spot for me. So that is your fly number one. Number two, this could be your Pat's rubber legs in size 10. If I could only pick one size, it'd be a 10. I will tie these in a size 8 on a curved nymph hook. I think the hook that I use is the Umpqua 200R. It's like a 3X long curved shank hook. I don't know if it was designed for stonefly nymphs, but it looks like it was. It's a beautiful little hook. So 8 to 10 really is what it should be here, not just a 10. But the Pat's is probably the greatest stonefly nymph of all time. I think I feel confident in saying that because they're super easy to tie. They're very buggy. They sink like a rock, and they're durable. So that's the best part about it. A lot of these other stonefly patterns are pretty complicated to tie. They look a lot more lifelike. They use a lot of goose bites, or they'll use a lot of wire, and that can be great. And sometimes you do need a more realistic stonefly imitation, but most of the time the Pats get you by with a lot less work. I just love it. It's a very effective little fly. Great for use early in the summer when the stoneflies are on, but it will catch fish. I'll fish these all the way until August or September sometimes because the stonefly nymphs are still active. Even if the adults aren't hatching, the nymphs are still moving, they're still wiggling down there, so the fish are still going to go ahead and eat them. Fly number 3 is going to be the Paragon in sizes 14 to 18. I like a nice wide range so I can dial in both the size and then how quickly they sink, because one of the Paragon's best qualities is that it's such a slim fly. It cuts through the water very quickly. There's nothing to slow it down from sinking. And then you tie it with a tungsten bead, a little bit of lead underneath there. It's really just going to drop like a rock. So they're very effective at getting down quickly, really good in pocket water when you've got a small, short pocket, but it's a little bit deeper and you want to get your flies down quickly to where the fish are. Paragon is a great choice. They're also not as clunky or clumsy to cast as some of the larger flies that also sink heavily, which is nice because sometimes you'll have a big dry fly on and a big nymph on because you're trying to get down deep. You're fishing this dry dropper rig, and the cast can feel not all that enjoyable because there's so much weight on there. Maybe you're using your 5-weight or your 4-weight instead, and you should have bumped up to a 6 or whatever. But it's not. We adapt to what situation we're in. The Paragon can get down kind of like those other flies, and it's a little more refined of an approach, if you will. They're also really easy to tie too. I think anybody could tie one of these. They on their face, you could say that they are made to imitate a mayfly nymph, but I think Paragons fall more into that attractor category of flies, which is they look like a whole bunch of different bugs, but they don't closely resemble one specific insect. So the fish will see them, they'll say, oh yeah, that's the right size and shape-ish, and they'll just eat it without really wondering, like, oh, is this actually the mayfly nymph that I thought it was, or is this a caddis nymph? It looks just enough like both that the fish will go ahead and snack on it. So it's a great fly to have around. Again, very easy to tie and sinks quickly. Fly number 4 is going to be one of my all-time favorites, the Frenchie. And I like this in 14s and 16s. I will tie these into 12s sometimes, but the vast majority of my Frenchies are 14s and 16s. And this is probably, of all the caddis nymphs that I fish, I think this one's probably my most consistent. I get the most mileage out of the Frenchie. And the first time I ever found the Frenchie, this was years ago. I was out on Utah's Green River. I was floating, and the guide had a Frenchie tied on underneath a cicada, and I caught almost every fish that day on the Frenchie, and it really blew me away. I couldn't believe how effective this little fly was. So I went home, I tied a few up, and started fishing them. For the last, 10 years, I would say they've been in my box. They're just a staple. They sink well. They're reasonably durable. They're reasonably easy to tie, but they're just a good little caddis imitation, and they just look like what you want to have down there crawling around when the caddis are coming off. Again, just a very effective fly. It's hard for me to talk up the Frenchie more than that. Our fifth fly is going to be not just the Prince Nymph, but the Jigged Prince Nymph. And I like these in sizes 12 to 16. The Prince is another one of those attractor style dry flies, or not dry flies, attractor style nymphs, pardon me, where it really, if we're going to pigeonhole it into one spot, it looks probably the most like a stonefly nymph, but it can pass for just about anything else down there on the bottom. It's got a lot of flash and movement to it. It's got some good proportions. So the fish really like a Prince. And that's why it'll work all summer for me. It's not just an early summer fly when the stoneflies are on. It is a consistent summer pattern from probably late May all the way until fall. It is a really solid fly to have on. I do like the jigged version of this fly better than the regular version because I think the jigged version gives it just a little bit more action in the water, because with a jigged fly, it's going to ride hook point up, and all the weight is really concentrated at the head of the fly. So it sinks at a bit more of an angle and it bounces at a bit more of an angle down there on the bottom. And because it's inverted, because it rides hook point up instead of hook point down, I think, and I don't have a whole lot to back this up, but just looking at fly design and pulling flies through the water a little bit when you can see them close to your feet and whatnot, I like the movement and the bounce that I get with that jigged Prince versus the regular Prince. The regular Prince kind of just drifts. The jigged Prince, I think, gets a little bit more movement to it just by nature of how it's tied. And then you've got that hackle around the front of the Prince nymph as well that's going to move and flex a lot. So between the movement of a jig itself and then the flex of that hackle, I just really like the way and the action that the jigged Prince looks in the water. So let's move on to our sixth fly. You probably knew this one was going to be on here at some point. The LCAR Caddis in sizes 12 to 18. Caddis are the name of the game during your summer hatches. They are going to dominate most of the summer. Once the stoneflies peter out in early to mid-July, your caddis are really center stage. They are your consistent fly that's just going to be there for you. You can cry on their shoulder when you need to. They're going to drive you home from the wing joint when you are in danger of bursting at the seams because it was all you can eat night and you ate more than you could eat. The caddis they're there for you. That's what they do. No, caddis flies, kidding aside, they're very abundant. And your late summer is kind of prime time for your caddis. You've got to have a great caddis dry in your box to take advantage of those hatches. And there is no better caddis dry fly, in my opinion, caddis adult, in my opinion, than the LCAR caddis because it floats well. It works fantastic in a dry dropper rig. They're very easy to see in the riffles because they ride high in the water and they've got that big elk wing on them. So when you're fishing them in fast water, they're a lot easier to see than a parachute fly. Parachute flies sit so low on the water. Sometimes they get swamped in the riffles and they start to sink a little bit. Then the LCAR caddis, they're fairly durable. Depends on where you get them from. The really cheaply tied ones won't be, but if you tie your own flies, there's a few other things you can do to make them last a bit longer. Then obviously the stuff that we have here at VFC, they're plenty durable. It's just really hard to find something that's not to love about the LCAR caddis. Now, our seventh fly is the Parachute Adams. Should surprise nobody that this is on the list as well. I like these in sizes 12 to 18. I think the Parachute Adams just might be the most versatile fly for the entire summer lineup because a really large one will work in a pinch during a stonefly hatch. It's not my first choice, but if I don't have any other stoneflies, I know I can throw on a big Parachute Adams, and I've had it work for me in multiple stonefly hatches before. It works great for drake hatches, and drakes are just very large mayflies. So if you get into a drake hatch and you don't have green drakes or gray drakes or brown drakes, the Parachute Adams can step in and fill those shoes. In fact, that just happened to me 2 weeks ago. Got into an amazing drake hatch. I had no idea the drakes were still even going. And I didn't have any green drakes with me, but I had a size 12 Adams and I caught, I don't know. I caught over 15 fish. I didn't really keep track. I caught a lot and it was a lot of fun. So the Adams worked for me in that drake hatch. And then when the other mayfly hatches come up during the summer, your pale morning duns, June and July, which is a smaller mayfly, you could toss it then. Obviously, you'd want one that matches the color because the fish usually get in on the color, but they might not be picky, and the Parachute Adams can slide right in for that. They'll work really just about anywhere for anything. They're great in a dry dropper rig. They're another one of those bugs that they imitate a lot of different bugs, but they don't mimic one very closely. So that makes the Parachute Adams a very effective fly. And again, it is one of my top flies for a dry dropper rig as well. That leads us to fly number 8, which is the Griffithnat in a size 18 and 20. You got to tie these small because even though there are a lot of big bugs that are coming off during the summer, you're still going to get hatches of small insects as well, which include Tricos, which are the tiniest of all mayflies. We'll get to those in a minute. But midges are still going to hatch during the summer as well. Midges hatch year round. They might be more dependable than the caddis. I talked the caddis up. I really should have reserved all that praise for the midge, to be completely honest, because they really are the ones who are there all the time. The caddis is like your best friend from high school that you never lose touch with, and the midge is like your dad. Right? The midge has to be there. It doesn't really have a choice. The caddis chooses to be there with you. That's how we'll go ahead and look at them. But the Griffithnat, it imitates those Tricos. Sometimes it imitates midges. Griffithnats, whether they work in a Trico hatch or not, is up for pretty big debate because Tricos tend to get fish really picky and they'll get down to a certain color of Trico sometimes. But early on in some Trico hatches, or if there's clumps of Tricos coming off, I've had Griffithnats work when nothing else did. So whether they actually thought it was a Trico or not, I don't know, but I like to have them around for those hatches just in case. But they are definitely very effective during midge hatches, especially if you don't have any midge adults with you. A Griffithnat will usually put a fish or two in the net for you. It's really hard to go wrong with the Griffithnat because it's another one of those attractor flies. It just looks like a whole lot of interesting, juicy bug meat up there on top of the water. And what fish doesn't like interesting, juicy bug meat? I mean, come on. Fly number 9 goes right along with the Griffithnat is the Trico in sizes 20 to 24. Tricos are going to hatch late summer through early fall, but you can also use a Trico adult to pull double duty as a midge. The only caveat there is that the fish need to not be too terribly picky because Tricos have tails and midges don't have tails. So if the fish are very picky, they're going to look at that and they'll probably shake their head and say, no, I'm not eating that one. But the Tricos are great because you'll get early morning and late evening hatches. You can go out and fish them. And especially if the water is warmed up a lot and you can't fish in the middle of the day because it's too hot for the fish, you can go out, get those early morning and late evening Trico hatches and really get into some fun fish. And just to continue about Tricos for just a minute, when the fish are going on tiny bugs, it's middle of summer and there's big caddis, there's big yellow sallies, there's big whatever out and about, and the fish seem to be eating tiny little bugs and you really can't figure out what bug it is they're eating, it's probably a Trico. And I think we're going to have to do a whole episode about Tricos here soon because they are infernally frustrating, but once you crack the code, they are so much stinking fun to fish. So definitely have some in your box. Even if the fish are just snacking on tiny little flies, throw a Trico out there. Even if it's not a Trico, there's a good chance they'll still eat it anyways. Fly number 10 is going to be the zebra midge, sizes 14 to 18. Midges, like I just mentioned, they're still active in summer. They're still doing stuff. They've still got to drive carpool. They've got to pick kids up from the pool. They've got to take them to dance class and whatever. They're around, right? Then you might think they took a vacation, but they're still here. You need a good midge larva pattern in your box all year round, and especially during the summer. So it's hard to beat the zebra midge for that. It's an incredibly effective fly. Some of the biggest fish I've ever caught have actually been on a zebra midge. I got a 23-inch brown on a size 16 olive zebra midge 2 winters ago. So definitely have those in the box for the summer. And they're really great just to tie off as the bottom fly in a dry dropper rig, especially if you're up in the high country. Maybe you're chasing some brookies or cutthroat. You're following some blue lines off the trail a little bit. Throw a zebra midge and an Elkatus on there. That's really all you need for a whole day's worth of fishing. You catch dinner with just those 2 flies right there. And speaking of blue lining and getting into those more eager fish, that brings us to fly number 11, which is the LCAR Stimulator. I like these in sizes 8 to 10. Summer's a time to go fish big, crazy flies because they look a lot like the big, crazy real-life insects that are out there. You can't look at a stonefly and tell me it doesn't look big and crazy because it does. They're a little scary, I'm not going to lie. I don't mind them crawling on me, but the first couple every season that start crawling on me, I still get the heebie-jeebies a little bit from it. I'm like, oh, crap. Oh, wait, no, it's just a stonefly. It ain't going to bite me. It just wants to do its stonefly thing. So the LCAR Stimulator is great for imitating stoneflies. Can also pass for a grasshopper. If the fish are eating hoppers, you don't have any in your box, throw a stimulator on there. Stimulators also float forever. That's also because they are one of the hardest flies, in my opinion, to tie. You got to use so much hair and hackle and thread. They're a pain. The proportions have got to be right. They're really just a pain in the butt to tie, but they're packed with so much hair that they will just float forever. So that is one really nice thing about them. And then, like I mentioned, these flies are a favorite for the people who are up chasing high country fish, whether it's brook trout or cutthroat or whatever, you're just blue lining a little bit. These stimulators look so nice and juicy that they really will pull up a lot of fish, especially in those smaller creeks and streams. So definitely worth having a couple in your box. Fly number 12 is the HalfBaked Caddis. This is a new addition to the VFC collection, not a new fly, but it is a new addition to our collections here at VFC. I like this in a size 16 to 18. I've mentioned a couple of times that caddis are very important during the summer months because once those stoneflies stop hatching in July, the caddis really do take center stage at that point. So a caddis emerger, and that's what the half-baked caddis is, becomes a very important fly in your arsenal because you want to be able to imitate all stages of that life cycle. And it really is shocking to me. And I don't think we understand as anglers. I don't think we really comprehend as a group just how many caddis trout eat. Because we started fishing this fly a couple of years ago. And I remember Alex, he had it on one day and he was absolutely killing it. I don't remember where we were, but he was catching so many fish. And I was like, what are you fishing? What are you doing? And he shows me this little caddis emerger, the half-baked caddis. And I said, oh, it's really interesting because I never really fish too many caddis emergers. I usually just focus on the dries. And I tied one on and it was almost like, I hesitate to say magic because there are no magic flies, but it was very effective. And since then, I've spent the last couple of years really diving into caddis just a little bit more because they are the bug that I know the least about. And I've fished this little half-baked caddis a ton. And what it's taught me is it's not that it's this pattern that's magic. It's a good pattern. But it's the fact that fish are eating caddis way more than we realize and way more frequently than we realize. Because the caddis life cycle, you got to remember, they'll emerge up out of the water, they'll become an adult, and they can live out of the water for up to a month before they come back to hatch in these giant, or to lay their eggs in these giant swarms over the water. So there's constantly caddis moving, becoming adults, going to land. These emergences, you don't always see them. They're not always very obvious, but it's really stood out to me just how much caddis fish actually eat. So hopefully I have sold you on the need for the half-baked caddis because it's a really good, it's a really effective little pattern to have in your arsenal. And you can fish it right below the surface film like a real emerger, or you can fish it down deep on a nymph rig. Both ways are very effective. And our last fly, number 13, gotta have it, is another caddis. This is the CDA Catfish Pupa, size 16 to 18. This is also another new addition to our collections here at VFC. Because again, that emerger, I told you how important that emerger is. Well, the pupa is just as important. And this is another fly that Alex started fishing with that he started really cleaning up with. We were out, I can't even remember where we were, but there were caddis, PMDs, golden stones, and I think midges all hatching at once this one evening. And I'm sitting there trying to figure out what they're eating on top. Alex just ties on a deep dry dropper rig with this little CDA Catfish Pupa on the bottom and just starts nailing fish because all those bugs were coming off, but the fish are really keyed in on the caddis because, again, there's so many of them and the fish really eat caddis more than I think we realize as an angling collective. So definitely got to have it. I like the green ones because they stand out very well in the water. And then a lot of caddis larvae are actually green, or caddis pupa, pardon me, are actually that bright green color. So it really matches what's actually in the water. And that rounds out our list of flies. If I left a favorite of yours off the list, please let me know in a comment, but be kind about it. Or if you've got a favorite fly that you would like to share with the rest of the audience here at VFC, then please make sure you leave a comment about that as well. But it is time for us to move on to the Q&A section of the show. Every week, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a question about fly fishing that you would like answered, you can send those in. There's a link to do that in the show notes or right here on the screen if you are watching the video podcast. Our first question this week is from Bronson from Colorado. Writes in and says, lately I have been fishing a stretch of a local river and the water speed has slowed down since my first time going there about 2 weeks ago. The water is moving so slow that it doesn't really seem like my flies are drifting, and if there's a slight breeze, my flies seem to stay perfectly stationary or even drift upriver. How should I go about fishing? The only thing I've found luck with is tying a size 18 hare's ear nymph about 12 inches below a dry fly and landing it basically on top of a fish that has risen within the last 2 to 3 seconds. I also found that stripping a small chubby, the smallest one I can find, I believe, are a 12 or a 14, to get some bites, but they are too big for the fish to take, it seems. How would you go about fishing this? Bronson, this is a good question. So like I teased earlier on in the show, rivers are going to change a ton throughout the year. Even tailwaters, which are rivers that come out of a dam. And since they're below a dam, those flows are managed pretty closely, which means they'll be more consistent throughout the year. You won't have dirty runoff water like you do elsewhere, but you will still have periods of high water, periods of low water, but it's usually a lot less extreme coming from a tailwater. But even in a tailwater, you're going to have changes. They're still just a little bit more consistent than your freestone, for example, which gets all of its water from rain and snowmelt and then a little bit of springs. But even tailwaters, like I said, even tailwaters can be drastically different based on the downstream water demand from the dam that created that river in the first place. So what I would tell you in this instance is take a step back and ask yourself, what's your job as an angler? It's to put flies in front of fish and make them look real. That's your entire goal. And right now, it sounds like you're not putting those flies in front of too many fish because the water is so slow that you're fishing. Fish will hold in slow water, but especially during the summer, the fish are going to be more in the riffles and the runs, places where the water is moving a little bit quicker. There's a few reasons for that. Number one is that's where the majority of the food is during the summer, because your mayflies, your caddis, your stoneflies, they all hatch in that faster riffly water that you find in riffles and runs. So you need to follow the flies because that's where the fish are going to be as well. The slow water that's barely moving, there'll still be some fish in it, but not many, because the majority are going to be hanging out where the food is. There's also a lot more oxygen in that quickly moving water. And especially during the summer, this becomes important because as water warms up, there's less dissolved oxygen in warm water. And when it's not moving, like in these slow spots, it can get warm and the fish are going to say sayonara and get out of there and go where there is more oxygen for them so they feel a little bit more comfortable. But again, the fish are moving away from the slow water to the faster water because they are following the food. So you've got to follow that food too if you want to catch some fish. Now, the key is understanding that fish are going to hang out in different water types as the year progresses based on what's hatching, okay? They're in the pools and the deep, slow runs in the winter. During the spring, you will actually find them migrating out of the pools to the riffles to hatch on the early mayflies and some of the bigger midge hatches. But once the hatch is over, the fish leave the riffles and go back into the pools and to the deeper runs because they don't want to expend more energy than it's worth to stay somewhere. That faster water, they've got to work harder to stay there, but they're willing to do it when there's a hatch going on because there's so much food that they are taking in more energy than they're burning. And then once the big hatches are over, again, the fish move back to the pools in the slow water come winter time, and they shift to eating a lot of midges, scuds, and worms as we move into winter. So spring, they'll start to move out. Summer, they're almost always in that faster water. And then fall and winter, they start to move back into that slow stuff. They move into the slow stuff to conserve energy and because their metabolism slows down as the water cools as well. So they don't need to eat near as much as they do during the summer. They're kind of like bears. They're packing on the pounds so they can make it through the winter when the bug activity is a lot lower. And if you're unsure what runs and riffles look like, we've actually got an entire ebook on how to read water. I'll link that in the show notes for you or on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. But you really should be looking for water that's moving at about walking speed or kind of that roughly 1 to 2 feet per second speed, because that's where the fish are going to be this time of year. They really won't be stacked in the slow stuff consistently. You might find one big pool that's got a whole bunch of them in it, and then the next 2 or 3 pools have nothing. Okay. As to your exact situation, Bronson, when you are fishing slow water like that, your best bet is to fish to the fish that you can see. So you're going to want to cast to the risers, which you said you're already doing. But then if you see fish eating just below the surface, cast to them and see if they're going to come up and eat your dry, or if they'll go down and eat that nymph. And speaking of that nymph, definitely play around with that dry dropper length. 12 inches is really short. You go down deep. You want to get that nymph down close to the bottom in that pool, because in the pools, the fish are usually going to be hanging out there. They're going to be down a little bit lower in the water column. So if that's the water you want to fish and that's what you want to keep doing, I would play around with your dry dropper length. I would change fly patterns out. I would work on targeting fish that you can see. But I would honestly tell you it's probably best to leave that kind of water and go find other water that's moving a bit quicker, that's got a much higher probability of having a lot of bug life and therefore a lot of fish hanging out in it. So hopefully that helps. I appreciate you sending the question on in. Austin from Montana has our next question, writes in and says, "Hey Spencer, I love what y'all do at VFC. I have learned so much from watching your videos and always enjoy them. I am relatively new to fly fishing and I do some of it from a raft. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with fishing that way, but if so, is it any different in the way you should fish if you are on a raft versus on the shore? Also, is fishing streamers and nymphs possible from a raft, considering you're constantly moving? And lastly, is having floatant with you mandatory for dry flies? I love your input on this so I can learn more and become a better fly angler. Thanks for your time and best of luck on the water." Austin, thanks for the questions and the kind words. I really appreciate it. The only big difference that you're going to notice from a raft versus wading is that you do not have the chance to work the water really thoroughly when you're in a raft, because when you're floating, you usually get one shot at a run before you're off to the next spot. Unless you fish the run, you get your one drift through it, you pull over at the bottom, you get out, you wade back up through it. You can do that, but that turns your float into a very long float if you do that for every piece of water. And sometimes it's not feasible. Sometimes it's too deep. Sometimes there's no bank. Sometimes the water's too quick. So that's why you're there in a raft in the first place. And then a lot of times you want to go explore. You want to see what's around the next bend and fish a lot of water. The thing with fishing from a raft or from a drift boat is it's usually about fishing a lot of water and not about fishing 1 or 2 spots really thoroughly like you would if you were wade fishing. So that really is the main difference. Otherwise, every other rule that we talked about, or not rule, pardon me, there are no rules in fly fishing. Every other guideline, can't believe I just said rule. What am I doing? Every other guideline that we talk about in fly fishing applies, which is put your fly in front of a fish, make it look real. That means from a raft, you've got to get some good drag-free drifts in places that the fish are likely to hang out. So again, nothing really changes. The angle is going to change. You're going to be casting downstream and doing downstream presentations instead of upstream. So that is going to change a little bit. But other than that, put those flies where you think the fish ought to be and make those flies look real. Same concept that you do when you're wade fishing. As to your second part of the question, streamers and nymphs are completely possible from a raft. In fact, I think the best way to fish nymphs and streamers, to be completely honest, is from a raft. Because when you're nymphing from a raft, you can get a drift for basically as long as you can mend and the person on the oars can keep up. You can get a drift for 100, 200 yards if the river is consistent for that long. And again, that you can make enough mends and the person on the oars can keep up. You can get these crazy long drifts. Just put your nymphs through tons and tons of water. It really is the best way to fish nymphs, in my opinion, because you get these long, uninterrupted drifts. It looks very, very natural that way versus when you're wade fishing, you probably get, 30 feet upstream from you, maybe 10, 15 feet downstream from you before you got to recast. So you've got a limited amount of room. From a boat, man, you can just work that and do really, really well. And then as far as streamers, I actually learned to fish streamers from a boat. So that's my preferred way to do it because I can toss a cast from the boat. I can cast perpendicular to the shore. And when I do that, the fly lands just a little bit behind the boat because the boat's moving. And if I cast directly at the shore, fly's going to land a little bit upstream of where I just aimed. And then I can pull it, strip it, retrieve it however I want back to the boat, kind of across the current instead of with it. And that gives the streamer great action. That really triggers some chasing instincts from the fish. It just looks really natural. It's a very visual. A lot of the times you can watch the trout come out and smack those streamers. So there's a lot of fun that can be had from fishing streamers from a boat. I think it's the best way to do it. I think you get a better presentation. You've got more casting room when you're in the boat because you have the whole river that you can cast from. It's a much more effective way, in my opinion, to throw streamers. A much more engaging way because you could stand on the bank and you could cast upstream at a 45-degree angle, let your streamer swing, let it swing through the water, strip it a little bit, step up. You fish that classic wet fly style of fishing. You can do that from the bank. And that's fun. Some people like it, but I like the highly engaging, chuck the streamer, watch the fish come in, really work the action of that streamer. And that's not to say you can't do it from shore. It's just a lot easier and a lot more convenient to do it from a boat. So that's why I really, really talk that up. So definitely do it. Give it a chance. Fish your nymphs and streamers from your raft. And lastly, you asked about floatant. For dry flies, it's not mandatory, but it makes the whole process a heck of a lot easier. It's kind of like, is wing sauce really mandatory on wings? Well, no, it's still going to be a wing, but I mean, it makes it way better when you put some wing sauce on there. When you're tossing your dry flies, after a few drifts, your dry is going to start to soak up water and sink unless it's a foam bug. And even then, sometimes the foam bugs need a little bit of floating throughout the day to stay up and perky. Sometimes that slightly sunken dry fly, it'll get the fish all sorts of excited because they might see it as an emerger or a cripple. So sometimes it pays off to not have too much floating on there and let it sink a little bit. But usually when you're fishing a dry fly, you're fishing it because you want to fish that done. You want to fish the adult version that's up on the water surface. If you want to fish the cripple or the emerger, you'll have a pattern for that. You'll tie it on behind that dry fly. So you want to make sure that it's up on the water surface, that it's floating the way that it should. So yes, floatant helps out a ton with that. You could just dry the fly off. You can blow on it if you don't want the floatant, but floatant's cheap. It lasts a pretty stinking long time. My system is really simple. I will soak my flies in the Aquel from Loon, get them nice and coated in that, let it dry for just a sec before I cast. And that'll last for a good chunk of time. It'll keep my flies floating. But once it starts to wear off and the flies start to sink again, I use the Loon Top Ride, which is a dry shake. And I just shake the flies off in that. It dries them off really well. And they'll float again for another 5, 6, 7 casts. And then I dry them off again as I need to. It's a pretty good system. Works very well for me. That's how I prefer to make sure I keep my dry flies up. But again, it's not absolutely necessary, but it definitely makes the process a whole lot better. So thanks for sending the question in. I appreciate it. Matt from Maryland has our next question, writes in and says, "Hi, Spencer. Love the podcast. It is super informative, and I always walk away learning something new. Recently, I had the fortune of joining up with a walk-wade guide trip in Pennsylvania. It was a great day, and I picked up a lot of great tips and had a blast at the same time. One thing that our guide stressed was the importance of having sharp hooks every time you go out. I didn't think at the time to ask how the heck to sharpen something like a size 20 RS2, but I am now. How much stock do you put in this activity before you head out to fish? Do you have any recommendations for what to use to sharpen my hooks and techniques for this process? Any information would be greatly appreciated. P.S. I've said it a couple of times in questions before. If you've not tried Old Bay wings, you definitely should. Matt, one of these days I'll get around to it. I promise. It's hard for me to want to not have buffalo sauce on my wings because I kind of love it. They're just so good. Classic buffalo is just, it's tangy. It's savory. You mix it with the chicken. It's just, I'm convinced, they talk about ambrosia and all that stuff and the old Greek mythology. It was just wings with a good wing sauce, I might add, because there are a lot of bad wing sauces out there. There's wing sauces out there that focus way too much on the heat and not enough on the flavor. I want a little bit of heat, but I don't want to burn my face off. That ain't enjoyable. I want a little bit of heat, but I want to taste it. I want to savor the experience. I don't want to worry about what's going to happen 2 hours from now when these wings have got to go through me and all that spice got to come out again. Because god dang, that ain't fun. Anyways, that was probably way too much information. I apologize. I will try the Old Bay wings at some point, Matt. I appreciate it. Anyways, let's actually answer your question here. Sharpening hooks, sharpening fly hooks. This is something I know competitive anglers swear by, and then a lot of folks in the like competitive fly anglers, but then a lot of competitive bass anglers, conventional gear guys that are fishing competitions, they're sharpening hooks too. A lot of fly guys don't, and I don't really know why. I think I don't know. It just seems like overkill. Maybe I don't know. But to do it, what you use to sharpen your fly hooks at any rate is the little tool called the hook hone. Now, a hook hone, it's basically just like a mini whetstone. You can get them small enough that they just hang right off of whatever fishing pack you've got. And using it's really straightforward. You just run the hook with the point going away from you. You run it down the coarse side of the hone on both sides of the hook, and then there'll be a little groove in the hone that gets the bottom. Because remember, you're sharpening, it's a tube. It's not just like a knife where you're sharpening two sides. You got to sharpen all sides of this round hook point. So you do both sides and then put it in the groove and get it nice and sharp. And then you can flip the hone over and do it on the finer sides. You got coarse and fine sides on these hook hones. And you're done in probably 20 seconds, maybe, to hone a hook. Not too long at all. Really simple process. Personally, I've never done it. I lose, or my flies end up being chewed to death before I think they get dull. But I did quite a bit of research on this topic because it's something I've never done. And I realized that, I probably should sharpen my hooks a little bit more, especially after I've rescued them from a tree or a boulder or something, because a sharp hook will certainly penetrate into a fish way more effectively. It's going to give me better hookups, and dull hooks have probably prevented me from sticking some fish over a few years. But the flip side of that is I know quite a few guides out here in the West, and I do not personally know a single guide who sharpens their hooks. So the guy out in Pennsylvania is like, yeah, I sharpen my hooks, and I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not doubting him at all. It's just something that I've never done that I don't know. I don't know if it's important enough to make as big of a difference as some people think. Really, it comes down to the fact that I catch enough fish that I'm happy with it. So that's kind of my measuring stick for all of these things, whether it's a new technique or honing your hooks. If it's anything that I haven't done before, and I think, okay, well, why would I do that? What advantage is that going to give me? Well, okay, I might catch some more fish, but I generally, I feel pretty happy with most of the fish that I catch, and most of the fish that I catch, or the fish that I don't catch, when I'm not catching them, I don't think it's because of the hook points being dull. It's because I'm fishing incorrectly. I'm not putting my flies in front of fish and making them look real. I'm not following the one rule or the one guideline. That's the second time today in the show. I'm sorry. The one guideline that does exist in fly fishing. So for me, it's kind of like, why would I add this when I know that I can always improve my presentation? I can always tie a better fly. I can always dial in my casting. I can always work on those other things that I think are going to give me way more of a bang for my buck when it comes to catching fish than just making sure I've got sharp hook points. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on it. If it's something that y'all think is worth doing, then I'm never trying to talk anybody out of it. I'm just giving my 2 cents on it. I don't know that it's something that's going to make a huge difference to your fish catching more so than focusing on other techniques that actually directly impact how your flies look and whether fish are going to eat them. So hopefully that helps. I appreciate you sending that question on in. And with that, folks, that wraps up the Q&A section for the show this week. But don't go anywhere, because we've got the Live Real Life moment coming right up. Every week, we end the show by sharing stories and pictures from folks in the VFC audience who are out there on the water living real life. I love to hear these stories and see the pictures and see what y'all are up to out there. It's fun to get all these different experiences from all over and share them with the audience. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment that you would like to share, there is a link to send yours in the show notes or right here on the screen if you are watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment is from Brandon. Early this year, I feel like I finally broke through and started learning to catch fish on my own. I owe everything to the VFC podcasts, videos, and this community. I dedicated a lot of time to everything I learned and had a really good streak this summer, catching fish every time I went out. Some days I spent hours to only catch a single trout, but I wasn't getting skunked and felt like I finally knew what I was doing. I recently returned from a 2-week trip out of the country and wasn't able to fish for nearly 3 weeks. I finally got back out on the water and had 2 full days on 2 different rivers, but I didn't catch a single fish. My confidence was squashed. Had I forgotten everything? Was I starting over? This weekend, I went out for a 3rd time, and the morning started off very similar. Hours of fishing, hundreds of yards of river covered, and nothing. I was about to give up and call it a day, but I had one more new spot I wanted to try. I'd been on a highly pressured tailwater and thought maybe if I found something away from the crowds, I might at least see some fish. I only had about 30 minutes to spare in the new spot I found, so I was definitely rushing and felt like this would never work. I found the perfect hole, and within just a few casts, hooked into something big, for me at least. The adrenaline set in, but I talked myself into a calm state, remembering everything I've learned when fighting a fish. I slowly got the fish close enough and put him in the net. 2.5 days of discouragement and no fish finally paid off. It was all worth it for one of my best browns. There is so much I can learn from this experience, and that's what matters most. There are going to be slow days, but nothing beats being on the water, and patience pays off when you keep at it. I returned the next day and caught 2 more fish within 30 minutes before I had to hide from a downpour of rain. Hopefully this inspires anyone who has been in a slump. I know it will help me moving forward. Never give up, never surrender, live real life. Brandon, I had to add the never surrender at the end of it because we just watched Galaxy Quest recently, my wife and I. So it was in my head. I apologize for ad-libbing to your wonderful story. I couldn't help myself. And you're 100% right. The opportunity to learn from these mistakes and to grow and to have those slow days gives you those days that are really unforgettable. And it's tough, like you said, to appreciate those slow days when you're in the middle of it, because it feels, you start to question, am I doing it? Am I doing it all wrong? Did I forget what I'm doing? Did I just get lucky? Do I actually know what I'm doing? There's a lot of self-doubt that creeps in at that point. And that can be a huge killer, because when you start to doubt yourself, why bother even going fishing in the first place? So it really can lead to this spiral of negativity. But when you pull out of it and you have an experience like you just did, you are really able to stack those, learn from them, and then eventually those slow days are going to become fewer and fewer and fewer. You're still going to have them. Just last week, I went out and I hooked one fish. It broke my fly off, and that was all the action I had all day on a pretty big section of river that usually fishes very well. So I got skunked. It's still going to happen. You're still going to have those days where you don't know, where you feel like you don't know what you're doing. But the opportunity to learn from them, that's the big key here. So I'm really grateful you shared that with us. I appreciate it. And with that, folks, we're going to wrap the show up this week. Thank you so much for listening to the whole show. It helps us out more than you realize. And if you haven't already, please make sure you rate and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it. The more ratings and subscriptions we get, the more folks we can help live real life. And that's our whole goal here at VFC. We want y'all to have those amazing days out on the water. We want you to learn. We want you to have fun. We want you to get out and catch some fish. So until next week, go do just that. Get out on the water, enjoy yourselves, and live real life.